Hey everyone. Today we're going to look at baking. So, baking consists of taking a high poly copy of a model and extracting details from it, which you can then impose over a lower poly model. Now, there's two main channels that are used for that, or two main sort of properties that you use that for. The first is a normal map. Now, normal maps, which we've sort of discussed before, uh, are used for giving an indication of the way that light should interact with the surface. So this is just a cube, slightly rounded corners, I think, but these are flat surfaces. But the shading is reacting as if it has all of this detail because it has this texture applied to it, which has probably been taken from a version of this cube which had all of that geometry carved onto it. Or this scope here, there's the 370,000 poly version and the 1000 poly version. They've taken the normal map from this and put it onto this to get this one. And so this is only 1,500 polys, but it looks almost like this 300,000 poly one because the light is reacting to it in this way, even though the geometry is not there. So it's an incredibly powerful tool, very, very standard. There's a couple articles on it here. This one in particular is very good and very in depth, but it might be a bit full on, especially towards the end. But it gets into the theory of all this stuff quite a lot. The other is ambient occlusion. Now, ambient occlusion is kind of used for deepening shadows. It's to do with parts of the model that would get more or less light if you shone a light on them. And so in practice, it just deepens shadows and recesses in a model. I sometimes compare it to putting on a wash if for anybody who does hobby modeling, Warhammer or anything. So it sort of soaks into those recesses and just darkens them to give everything a greater sense of depth. That's more or less what ambient occlusion does. Now, it can be done in a couple ways. You can do it as a post-process at runtime, but then it would be responding to the low poly model. You can also bake out the high polys ambient occlusion and put it in a texture instead, so that it has that high polys shadows. But we're gonna do a high poly and a low poly and some baking today. So I'm gonna start over in Maya, and I'm gonna do a very simple example first. And I'm just gonna make a plane. And as far as the post class, this is the activity I want for you to do. Is this part? Now I just drew out a plane, but I do want to be precise about this. So I'm going to, in my channel box, or you could do it in your attribute editor, it doesn't matter. Make sure that it's at 0, 0, 0, and make sure it's width and height 50 and 50, nice and clear cut. Now, a couple of problems you might encounter when you make this, which you want to nip in the bud. Because I made it a different size to begin with, that's what it said its UVs at, was based on that. I want to fix this because it really matters what my low poly's UVs are, because whatever the high poly details are will be projected onto the low poly's UVs. So if I projected onto this now, they'd be all stretched and warped, right? Like if I turn on my checkboard, you see how it's all scaled. So I want this to bring up the whole space. Because it's a simple plane, it's nice and easy. I can just do automatic or something on this, and it'll know what's up, right? But if you're doing a more complex model, obviously you unwrap it the same as you would anything, but you've got to unwrap it before you bake. Right? So I didn't have to do it then. I just had to do it before I bake. But I'll do it then. And for my for this demonstration, we're just going to work on a plane. So this is fine for my low poly right now. So I'm just going to duplicate it. And I'm going to call that first one and bring my outliner. This is an optional step, but I like to be thorough, plane, low. And then I'm going to put it on its own layer. This won't really affect much being that it's just a plane, but with a more complex model, I like to have the original model there as a template. So I'm going to show you how to do it. I'm going to take my low poly, and in my layers window, I'm going to click this one here, which is create a new layer and assign selected objects. When I click that, nothing happens immediately, but now I have these options here for everything that's in that layer. And this last one is for kind of locking the object without hiding it. And so the first one is template, which makes a wireframe, which we can't tell while that's there because we had a duplicate there. And then the second one is reference, which will have it as fully smooth shaded, but that's going to get in the way. So we're going to set it to template. And that'll be a little bit more apparent when I show an example with a more complex model later, why we would do that. And so now I've got this duplicated plane, and I actually can't click on the other plane anymore. I can only click on the duplicated plane. That's why I did this. Now I'm going to rename this to high, so I can easily tell them apart in the outline. And I'm going to modify this model. Now I can't be too drastic in the way that I do this. Normal maps are really only for picking up micro surface detail. They're not for any sort of real complex forms or shapes. So I can only really make bumps and divots and stuff on the surface here. But that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to insert an edge loop, cut like this, and I'm going to just extrude this down a little bit. I'm not going to go too far. And then I'm going to chuck some more shapes on here in a second, but I'm just going to quickly get rid of these ones on the end just to make that work a little better. So I just cut like a little bit of a channel in it, right? Now, one thing to note is baking normal maps doesn't like straight up and down lines like this, right? I'll show you why. If I look at this from my orthographic top view, I can't see it. If I look at it from my side view, there's sort of something. Front view, not really anything, right? You can't really tell. But if I grab these edges and then I do just a very small bevel, right? It's just a little bit rounded. And now I look at it from my top view. Now I can see it, right? Because these lights are coming in orthographically. They're coming straight down, straight across on both of these angles. So you need to have a little bit of an angle change in order for it to really actually be visible to the light. So that's just something to be mindful of. Now I'm going to add a couple of details to this. I'm going to add one thing that's going to be deliberately bad so that we can see what happens when we bake. And that's just a big cube right here, sticking a long way out and straight up and down so that we can see what the artifacts we get are from doing this. Now, again, like I said, first part is that it's not going to be visible. That'll be to the normal map. Now the AO is going to have problems because when we do our bake, it's going to expect things to be quite close to the surface, and anything that's too far away isn't going to get the light cast on it properly. And this is just going to be a big black mark on our AO. But I'll show you anyway. Now, for the next one, I'm going to make a cylinder over here. And you're going to be quite short. But I'm going to show you some high poly modeling. Now, high poly modeling in Maya, I'm going to move this away so it's a little bit easier to see for a second. High poly modeling in Maya is a little bit different to, say, sculpting in something like ZBrush. And no doubt at some point, one of you has pressed that and gotten this, had this happen and gone, oh no, what did I do? Or this one, right? That's what they're for. So this is a smooth preview. It shows what the model will look like if we hit smooth on it. And this is a smooth like, proxy mode. It shows you the existing wireframe and what it will look like if you smooth it. Reasons. This is more or less how we do our high poly modeling, is that we look at what it would look like smoothed, and then we change the existing wireframe. I'll show you how. Actually, a cube will work better for this. So I'm going to make a cube, and I'm going to, and we can see a little bit more obviously what would happen if we just smooth this random cube. And I'm going to insert some edge loops. I'm going to put one here. Now what happened is that the smoothing is happening, but the smoothing is happening between these 2 points. It's saying like from here to here, smooth it, not from here to here. So the closer these edges are together, the harder the point I get at the end. Yeah. So we get this little domed thing happening. And now this is the detail that I want to put on this, but I can't just do that because it's actually just a cube with some subdivisions right now. I need to turn it into this. So what I do is I press 3, and then I go, because I pressed 2 to get that, by the way. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. All right. So with either 2 or 3 on, I go to modify, convert, smooth mesh preview to polygons, and it applies that preview. So this is its actual geometry now. And that's under 1, with 1 on. And now if I press 3, it'll smooth it again, which is just the same thing but more. And you know what? I'm even going to do that because it doesn't matter that it's 10,000 tries, because this is the high poly for baking, and that's fine. It's allowed to be. Another one doesn't really do anything, so I'm not even going to bother. All right, but I'm going to take this, and I'm going to put it on model somewhere. And I don't even have to worry about cleaning it up or anything like that. I'm going to stick it just a little bit inside the model. It's still probably too tall. So I'm just going to quickly scale it in a little bit and put it inside the model a little bit. And so we get something a little bit like this on it. Let's see how that looks from the top. That's going to be visible. That's going to be very nice and visible. All right. I like to use the top view as an indication of how noticeable those details are probably going to be. All right. Now, we're going to bake this out. So I need to make this all one mesh first. So I'm going to grab these, go mesh, combine, and then I'm going to delete the history so that it gets rid of the grouping that was going on there. And I'm just going to quickly, I don't have to, but I'm just going to rename it because it lost its name when I did that. And I'm going to check they're still in the same place. So I'm going to turn the old one on just to make sure that it's still in the same geographical position, because that's important. They both have to be at the same point in the world, because that's relative as well. When I export these out, it's going to do the projection based on where they are. So if one of these is a little bit off, it's going to bake wrong. It's going to bake as if they're in the same, as if they're like this, right? So these details will be off. So this is important, and it's all zeroed. And now I'm going to select my plane. I can actually do that. If I do that from the outliner, I can do it while it's like this as well. So I'm going to select my plane, and I'm going to export that out. I'm going to go export selection, desktop. I still have these from the other day. I'm going to get rid of those. Oh, I can't do it from here. All right, I'm going to do it from jar, high, and plane low. There we go. All right, so I'm going to export as low, and I'm going to select this one, and I'm going to go export selection. Make sure you're using selection. You need to make sure you only have the low model in the low and the high model in the high. Plane high. Keep my naming consistent. All right. And now I'm going to open up a piece of software called XNormal. So I'm going to have to find that. XNormal. All right. And now I need to load it. Yes, it looks like something from the 2000s. It's absolutely horrible, but it does the job. Yeah, 2005 to 2017. But you can also do this in Substance, and you can do it in Mixer, and you can do it in these other tools. It's just a little bit more complicated, and XNormal is free. You can just download it. This is also a good way of doing your normal maps from a black and white texture if you can't do it with Photoshop. It's under the tools. It's able to do that too. But we're going to put our models in. I'm going to get rid of the ones I did the other day. So you click on high definition models and you right click in here. The UI is awful. And you go add meshes, desktop, plain high, low definition meshes, add meshes, plain low. I'll talk about those in a second, but you don't need to do anything just yet. Baking options. So here you decide what you want to bake, where you want to save it to. So I want to save it under, get rid of those. Oh, so I want to save it as plain and as a TGA. TGA is my preferred texture format for materials. And I only write plain. It'll give them the prefix. So yeah, and I indicate if I want normal map, ambient occlusion. I tick everything else off if they're there. Some of these are handy. Some of them are very, very, very situational. And I like to start with just doing something really low res and simple because that way it'll get done in like 3 seconds. So I turn my file size right down and my anti-aliasing right down just to generate to make sure that this worked. And you see this is actually still too high. That's what this black is on the ambient occlusion map. The normal map has already been baked and dumped. The AO is what actually takes the most time. And this has done exactly what I expected it to do. I had hoped this one wouldn't be too high. But what we're going to do is I'm going to go to my low definition meshes. And this is one way to resolve this if you don't want, or you can't make these details any shallower, is to make these rays a little bit longer. So this is from how far it's looking on the model. So if I set these to 1, and then I bake again, and I'll overwrite, and I'll overwrite. Yeah, this is fine now. I'm okay with that. This is exactly the problem I expected to have, and that's okay because it's there as an example. But this has come out nicely. So I'm going to close that. Now I would bake it at a much higher resolution. So I'm going to do a 2048 by 2048, and I'm going to do a 4 times anti-aliasing. And I'm going to actually pause the video for this because it's going to be sitting here for a few minutes. If you go any higher, you'll be sitting here for a very, very, very long time. All right, so there's my higher res version, more anti-aliased. Done. So I'm done with XNormal now because I'm not going to go back and fix this. I want to see, you'll be able to see how better the problems with doing it and having those problems when we move to Unreal. One other thing to note is that if either of my models had n-gons, it would yell at me and fail. So your topology has to be nice on your high poly model still. You just can't, you don't have to unwrap it. You only have to unwrap the low. But both of them have to have solid geometry. Now let's go over to Unreal, and I'm just going to import the normals and occlusion. And if I was putting this on a model, I would only need the low poly. I don't need the high poly anymore. The high poly only exists to help me create these textures. It is replaced by these textures. I'm not going to bother importing a plane though, because I can just make a plane. So I got my normals, I got my occlusion. I'm gonna just put a plane in the scene to put this on. One of the other reasons that I use a plane for the first demo is I don't need to worry about the model. And material, I'm just going to go do plane, chuck it on, open it up. And in here, I'm going to take my normals and my AO. Should just maximize this. All right. And for the sake of demonstration, I am going to plug some stuff in up here as well. So I'm going to hold 3 and click, and this will give me a color or a constant 3 vector. I'm just going to choose a mid-tone gray just so it's nice and visible. I'll plug it into base color. And I'm going to press 1 and click for my metallic and my roughness. And I'm going to give it non-metal and half rough. Just to begin with, the reason I made these is so that I can change them because I'm pretty sure these are actually the default values anyway. But texture channels that we made. Normal map, you have to use the RGB because it's full color. Plug it into normal. Ambient occlusion is black and white, and so all of these are the same. So we only have to choose one, which is usually red. But that also means that this is able to be channel packed. We're going to apply, and we're going to save, and we're going to minimize this. All right, and now we have our model, and we can see that this has just got a weird, it's almost like a stain, right? Because it's got the shadow painted onto it, but it doesn't have any updating lighting information. But these have updating lighting information, and if I move this around, we can see like a sense of depth there as the normal map responds to the light and the changes in the light, right? Even though it is a flat piece of geometry, right? So that is why we do baking, is so that we can use this higher poly model to create details for us that persist on low poly models or show up on low poly models, and just save us a lot of computing resources. So I quickly just made a example on an actual model. Same sort of deal. I just made a basic cylinder, and that would be the same as with any model. It doesn't matter its complexity, as long as you have roughly the same form and you're only creating details, you can do this. And this is standard process for models that come out of like ZBrush and stuff, fully sculpted and detailed. You would make a low poly version that is roughly the same shape, but just doesn't have all of the micro detail. And then you would do this same process, and in Engine it looks like this. This is the low poly cylinder that's 20 subdivisions and no caps or anything. What is my try difference? So the high is 31,000 tries, and the low is 84. No, 16,000, 31,000 on the 80 tries on the low poly. 31,000 on the high poly. And this is how it turned out. So I've got some UV problems here because I did a very, very quick unwrap, but if we just look at this detail around the outside, it looks fine, right? Like I've got nice depth to it. Looks like a handle or a bin or something that might have that kind of pattern on it.